Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, your last stop shop for the films you can't unsee. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're joined by Aisha Harris, co-host of NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour and author of the new book, Wannabe. Today's films are two bizarre true crime stories where seemingly harmless, ordinary people found themselves in extraordinary circumstances and ended up doing the unthinkable. We'll talk about what the films and these incidents say about human nature, and if that's enough to make it worth putting yourself through them. They are Craig Zobel's shocking 2012 thriller Compliance and Stuart Gordon's 2007 darkly comic thriller Stuck. Seeing is believing. All right, our guest today is the illustrious Aisha Harris. Aisha has written and edited for both the New York Times and Slate Magazine and currently co-hosts NPR's very popular podcast, Pop Culture Happy Hour. And her new collection of essays is called Wannabe, Reckonings with the Pop Culture That Shapes Me, which is available right now wherever books are sold. So Aisha, thank you for joining us for two pieces of pop culture I assume are not among the ones that shaped you, unless I'm wrong about that. I would hope not.
No, they are not.
Okay.
No, yeah. But thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. It's so great to meet you. And I'm sure you're excited with the book being out now.
Yes, it is. It has been quite an experience. It's like 2-ish years of my life writing it, and now it's finally out in the world, and I'm very excited. But it's been a journey, and I'm very excited for people to check it out, especially if they are very, very interested in pop culture of all kinds. Maybe not the unwatchable kind, but the kinds that have shaped all of us.
All right, and I know that I've seen, the excerpts that you're posting on Twitter, and it seems like it covers a pretty wide range of subjects. Is there kind of something uniting them, or is this more of like freewheeling reflections?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely go down a lot of different rabbit holes, but this is, coming from me as a millennial Black girl who grew up in the 90s and the aughts. So there's references to everything from, like the teen comedies that we grew up on, like She's All That, 10 Things I Hate About You. But then there's also a lot of more like contemporary musings, including musings around franchises and franchise fatigue and how overwhelming it is to know that like everything you've ever loved will probably be rebooted in some form.
Forever.
So like yeah. So
It's
the
scary.
sort of uniting theme amongst them is sort of just what it means to be someone who grew up with pop culture, how I've negotiated my experiences with them, and also hopefully for people to get a little bit more, feel free to sort of critique the things that they love, and also feel free to love the things that they love, even if other people don't like them. So it's about really just observing my own relationship to pop culture, and hopefully other people will be able to take from it some lessons about how to not always take things so personally, but to also really enjoy the things that they love for what they are.
Yeah, that is such a relevant just topic right now, I guess, for anybody who's looking at how pop culture affects them, whether it's movies or TV shows or music or memes or whatever, because it's just so constantly refracted back on us now right away. And it's never just as simple as this is just a thing that I love, that I grew up with. There's the whole ideology about different franchises and the state of the movie industry, and I don't know, people kind of forming little gangs of allegiance to things.
Yes, it's a very real thing. I didn't expect that this would happen, but I do quote none other than Kenny G in one of the essays, and I don't know if you've seen the documentary that was made a couple years ago about him, but it's all about exploring his polarizing personality, or not his personality, but like his music being very polarizing, and people love to hate on him. And he says, like when someone says that they hate something that you love, you take it personally, and I think that's such an apt, like, I don't like Kenichi's music at all, but I do think that he like very much understands who he is, and that made me respect him even more. And that's kind of what I was getting at with this whole book, is just like, we don't always have to love the same things or hate the same things. It's okay, just like calm down, people on the internet especially.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a unique thing now. People didn't have to always deal with in the past several decades, or at least it's more visible now. But I saw that you did record an audiobook for this too.
I did, yes. That was quite an experience. So anyone who prefers to hear their books read aloud, it is me. It is me doing voices at various points. I do my best attempt at a Dave Chappelle impression. You can be the judge as to whether it's good or not. but yeah, it was quite fun, and I'm excited for people to get a chance to listen to it as well if they don't read it in a physical copy.
Yeah, man, if I ever get a book published, they gotta let me do the audiobook. That sounds fun. I'm sure it's hard because you're probably restarting a bunch and stuff with certain paragraphs that don't like, oh, I didn't I imagine you like start editing or something like while you're reading it out loud again, and you're just like, oh, I wish it was like a little different this way, or it would sound better if I said it this way. Did you cheat ever?
Did I cheat? How would you cheat?
Where you would be like, you know what? I'm not going to say this sentence this way because I actually think it would sound better this way, and I'm going to actually say it this time.
Well, if you do that to a certain extent, then they have to like call it an abridged version or like note that. But there were some lines that like were tweaked just a little bit, not even just for that, but like I do quote a lot and I quote song lyrics, and apparently I can't sing the actual melody because that could put us in like copyright territory. So I had to like read them as though they weren't song lyrics, which was very awkward to try and do. So yeah, like those are the sort of adjustments I had to make. I was like, really, I can't just say, this is one line, I can't sing it. They're like, no. Like,
that's okay.
Yeah.
Is the title a song lyric reference?
Well, Wannabe.
Okay.
Yes, Spice Girls definitely make an appearance. I have an entire chapter that is about the Black best friend in pop culture, that sort of trope that we've seen in a lot of movies, including, and TV shows. So like New Girl. I also reference Showgirls, and Wannabe. The Spice Girls definitely played a part in that because I grew up right when they were at their peak. And Scary Spice, I had a very complicated relationship to, as someone who had mostly white friends. And like when you're playing Spice Girls, am I automatically going to have to be scary? But what if I don't want to be scary? So yes, Spice Girls were a kind of an overlying sort of mood board for me. And I even created a playlist that corresponds with a book, which people can find on Spotify, and the Spice Girls make a couple of appearances on there. So yeah, it's fun.
All right, those must be fun lyrics to just read without a melody.
Yes, absolutely.
Really, really, really want to zig a zig ah.
Yes.
All right. Well, do you mind doing? We could want to talk about one of these movies in your Dave Chappelle impression. Feel free to break it out.
Oh goodness! So, yeah, I'll see if I can slip it in there.
Okay,
somewhere.
Great.
Yeah, lighten the mood.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm very much looking forward to that. It sounds very interesting, and it's very fun to hear your thoughts. I follow you on Twitter and anywhere that your writing appears or where you can be heard. So we encourage everybody to check that out. Again, these movies we're about to talk about are not on the fun side, especially the first one that we're going to discuss, which is Compliance from 2012. And before I get into the specifics of this, was this something that you covered or wrote about like back when it first came out?
Yeah, I actually remember seeing it, going to a public screening of it, and in 2012. And I remember being in the audience, and my kind of, I probably covered my eyes a bunch of times or like audibly gasped several times. I was like, really? Like, come on now. Like this movie is one of those where you're watching it and each time, like each scene gets increasingly worse and worse and worse. And I don't really remember the screening too well, except I remember there were at least a couple of people who walked out in the middle of it. And there was a Q&A afterwards. I cannot recall who was actually doing the Q&A and who was involved. But I do remember people seemed like visibly angry about the entire movie. And I was like, are you reacting to the movie itself? Or are you just reacting to what actually apparently happened in real life? And so it's like this movie feels like a very interesting sort of litmus test for the audience, is like, how much sympathy do you have for people who do things that you think are kind of dumb or just like seem to lack any logical sense? And it definitely tests my sympathy or empathy for people, because I'm just like, I don't understand how we let it get this far. Like, really? But yeah, this movie, it is watching it a second time, and for the first time since I saw it 10 years ago, like I think probably I respect it even more, because I think it really does do a good job of sort of just like laying out what happens without feeling too exploitative, even though the movie is about exploitation. And I just find it really, really fascinating. And I think Ann Dowd is just really like perfect in this role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And speaking of what actually happened, I just want to make sure our listeners note and just give a little bit of background on the actual incident, which I did a little bit of research on after watching this movie. So this is based on events that happened in 2004 in Mount Washington, Kentucky at a McDonald's, although in the movie it's changed to kind of a fictional place and they changed the names of the people. But otherwise, it goes pretty much beat by beat with exactly what happened. It adheres very close to the actual story. And the gist of it was that this was a prank call from somebody posing as a police officer and spoke to a manager at this McDonald's and basically convinced her to detain an employee who he claims had stolen money from a customer. And over the next 3.5 hours, through the instruction of the caller, and trying to involve multiple other employees in it, the girl is questioned and strip searched, and eventually the manager's fiance is called in and takes the phone as well, concluding in a sexual assault. And it wasn't until finally somebody, a maintenance man, refused to participate in this, that they started to become skeptical of what had happened. The manager called a higher level manager that the caller was claiming to have also been speaking to. And of course, they didn't have any idea what was going on. And it became clear that this was not an actual police officer. And the entire thing was captured on surveillance footage, which was reviewed by detectives and in the ensuing trial afterwards. But they actually then found out that this had happened over 70 times in 30 different states. And you can read dozens and dozens of examples of this being successfully pulled off by assumedly the same guy. And just for anyone curious how this ended up turning out, which the movie doesn't really follow that far, is that they found a guy in Florida through these phone cards that he had been using. And he did go to trial, but based just on the evidence of the phone cards, he was acquitted. And basically right after that, all of the prank phone calls stopped mysteriously after that. It seems pretty obvious he was the one who did it, but the manager was convicted of unlawful imprisonment, and the fiance is really the only one who ended up doing jail time for sexual abuse. And
yeah, I scanned that wiki page real hard for like the hyperlink that was going to get me to the page that tells me about the guy who did it, but there was none, and it was just like this really sad, like, oh god, come on. They didn't really get him.
And I had read about this previously before watching this movie, which I just did now for the first time. So, I did know this was something that actually happened. And I feel like the movie sets that up at the beginning, because the first thing you see is like in giant letters, inspired by true events, like taking up the whole screen, almost to like preemptively say, listen, you might not find any of this plausible, but this is
What it
exactly
is.
what happened. But of course, it's still the movie's job to make it feel plausible. And I think that, this is shot in a very low key, realistic way with little known actors, and doubt accepted. And I was sucked in on that level for sure. And that's what makes this so harrowing.
Right. And it still is very artful with the way the filmmaking goes, though. There's a lot of interesting emphasis on B-roll, like very stylized kind of B-roll, because we are just like in the same place for a long time. So it would be like very easy to just make this kind of like, and you could kind of ignore that need to like add more of atmosphere or artifice to a movie like this, where the story is just so punchy and so like just like, oh, like some really intense stuff you're reading in the newspaper. You don't really need artifice, but there is like an interesting, like, I don't know, there's like I love all the arty sort of like boiling of French fries and things like that throughout the day, where like getting uh, all these bird's eye views of like various things that are happening throughout the restaurant while this is happening in the back, which everything shot in the back is very straightforward and very stark, which makes it very affecting and like uncomfortable for sure. But yeah, I was impressed by that, and especially in comparison to our movie that we're talking about later, Stuck, which is similarly a true story. It is more like of a clinical, like they're relying on the fact that it's an intense true story that you can't believe happened or something. But the filmmaking is not necessarily as inspired, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely plays to me like a horror film.
Yes.
And the reason why they put the based on a true story is because like all of these characters do kind of act like they're in a horror film. Like characters in horror films are always doing the dumbest things or the most wrong things. Like why would you hear something, you're by yourself, why would you open that door? Like, and then when you're watching this, it's similar where it's like someone keeps telling you, "Oh yeah, like they're saying they're a police officer and they're claiming that your manager is also on the line." But like you never hear from the manager directly and you are just assuming all these things. How gullible are you? And what I really liked about this film is that yes, it's very hard to believe if you were just given a rundown of what was happening and someone explained this plot to you without seeing it, you'd be like, oh, come on now. Like, who would actually do this? But what this film really proves is what police officers and what law enforcement, the hold that they have on American psyche in terms of their control and power, and how just saying that you are a law officer or an officer of the law can make people just automatic. Like the movie's called Compliance. Like you will comply because you fear authority, not being you fear not being able to do your civic duty or whatever. And that's how the Ann Dowd character keeps being roped in. The person on the line keeps saying, like, can we count on you? We need you to really help us. Like, this is such a huge help. You are doing your duty. And you'll notice that each character will sort of like feed the other person on the line information without even realizing they're feeding information. They'll say, we have one of your employees, they're blonde, and she'll see the endowed character will just be like, oh, Rebecca or Becky. And there's like, oh, yeah. Her name's Rebecca. Like, it's just like, so those little small details all add up and really help explain why everything got to the point that it did. And even as we in the audience are probably like, I would never do that. I can also, to some extent, see how in that given situation, someone could have their blinders on to a certain extent. I don't know if you guys felt that way too, but like, it was very convincing to me, at least by the end of it, why all of those little pieces added up together to what they were. It doesn't make it any less depressing, but it made sense.
Yeah, I thought
it's definitely being very empathetic and like trying its best to like think through the motivations and what they might have been, and not always like where it might be easy to like maybe there was more of like sinister intent for certain characters we don't know, like or the real life people that were involved. Like there might have been something there, but it seems to be very generous in the humanity of these characters, and that they are like just as swindled and caught up in it all as Becky is, and
Yeah, I found it to be very convincing. And I think it starts even at the very beginning when we see the manager character who's kind of being belittled by this delivery driver. And at first she stands up for herself a little, but she ends up apologizing and thanking him to come out and, kind of submitting to him. And there is a little bit of a hint, of even resentment towards Becky, the employee, when she kind of gives her this look when she overhears her kind of making fun of her for using the word sexting. And it doesn't.
Man, yeah, I was so glad you brought up that prologue. It sort of feels like a little prologue, because it feels like once you're done with the movie, I remembered that scene, like where she's arguing with the guy about how like, yeah, they don't have bacon, and that's almost like a joke or something. But it is like, I think it is really important in that it is to put you in that world of like subservient food service, sort of like which is sort of like a mindset that you are kind of like beaten into sometimes in these like service oriented jobs, which are like you're just constantly having, even though it's not right and you shouldn't have to, you're constantly having to like nod and apologize and be nice. And she's displaying it even outside of, like, she's not on the clock necessarily in a real way, and that is, yeah, like caught up in that kind of like really intense mindscape.
And I think a lot of the credit goes to the cast, which I think everybody is really good here, but especially Ann Dowd. Like you were saying, Aisha, she's someone who's been in a lot of small roles in tons of movies. For like Philadelphia, Hereditary. She's one of Toni Collette's, like the member of her support group that she talks to. I believe she won an Emmy for The Handmaid's Tale. And I guess she was on The Leftovers as well, which I haven't seen. But this is such a showcase for her. I know that she won the National Board of Review Award for supporting actress for this, even though I think it's very much a leading role. And the way that she makes it so plausible, and you can see her, kind of getting flustered and browbeaten, and like she is trying to do the right thing. And also, the people in this movie in general are not super bright because of what is all happening here, which is definitely an aspect of it. But the way that they manage to balance that without seeming too like they're too dumb or too smart, where it seems implausible that they could fall for this. And another thing you were saying, Aisha, about the guy on the phone, who's played by Pat Healy, who's I think does great as well. People might recognize him as the pharmacist in Magnolia that Julianne Moore like shrieks at, because he's another guy.
Call me lady. Shame on him. Shame on him.
He's another guy who's like, just been in small roles in tons of movies, and he kind of works, like a telephone psychic, where he'll feed them a little bit of information and then wait for their reply, and then use that so that even later on, the manager says something like, he did give, like, well, he knew her name and that she had a brother, and we're remembering, no, you told him that, but that didn't even register to her. And he just has this mix of, complimenting her, playing into her ego, but then reprimanding her, and just always having this confidence of how to control the situation, and making them call him sir, is always a thing that kind of psychologically ends up working to influence them.
Yeah. I mean, this is like psychology 101, basically. The whole film is an exercise in like the power of suggestion, the power of, making people feel as though they are special or important in order to sort of like giving their ego a little boost because they feel as though they are being helpful. And the story, the lie that that Pat Healy's character keeps telling keeps getting bigger because it zooms out from Becky stole from a customer to, well, Becky's boyfriend, or no, sorry, Becky's brother is involved possibly in some sort of crime ring or whatever. And like now it's turned into a federal thing. It's just like, what is this? But I mean, not all the characters, you mentioned the maintenance worker who's kind of the last straw, but then there are other characters too who are like, this is wrong, including Becky's friend Kevin. And he is brought in at one point to look after Becky and told on the phone, like, you need to strip search her, and he refuses. But of course, again, when we're talking about power, it's not just even the people who refuse or who say, like, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, they still don't feel powerful enough to actually stand up and try and stop it. And so it's just such a really interesting exercise to see the people who are super gullible. And, even though Ann Dowd's character to some extent doesn't want to do these things, you can also see how this is like making her feel as though she's empowered in a way that she didn't feel in that earlier scene when she was dealing with the guy who's delivering the items. And I think it's really interesting to see how those levels of power sort of like play out across all of these characters in this one small little fast food restaurant. It just feels really realistic, and another reason why I think this movie is just really good, because it just seems like it's presenting the facts as they were, as like as close to how they were as we can imagine them being.
No, there's such an interesting chain. Like everybody's like looking up the ladder at whoever's like in charge of them, and they're just like, "Well, do you think so?" And they say yes, and then so that like it all goes up to Ann Dowd, who, like you said, I think like that's apt that it is like she's living out a borderline fantasy or something of what, and like going too far with this idea of like she's the manager, and like it like kind of exposes that there's something like kind of ego driven, and like her thinking that that means something more than it actually does. Like she is like, like, listen, like everybody, these lower employees doubting this, like, well, they're lower employees. Like I have my first gut feeling, and I'm going to go with that because I'm the manager and everything, and everybody bows to that. And yeah, it is psychology 101. You can totally like apply this as metaphor for so many different like situations. And I'm sure, oh man, and it is just sad to watch it all like kind of crumble like that, and her being exposed, especially Ann Dowd being exposed as sort of like, I don't know. Yeah, like thinking that this is her big moment or something, like that she's really like doing something here, and she's just really like, yeah, she's fucking up.
Yeah, and the actor who plays Becky, Dreama Walker, I'm not quite sure how to say her name. I guess she's on Gossip Girl and has a very small role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She, as playing basically the victim here, is, it's a less showy role, or something that could be easy to overlook, but it takes a lot of modulation to make sure that it's plausible that she would stay in this situation. And she really does seem just over her head, like just a young person who's just in no way equipped to deal with an authority figure, whether on the phone or her manager, to get to the point where she is, naked for most of the movie, just covered in this apron. And things just get so horrible from there, which is what it makes this. I don't know, the movies that we've covered lately, we kind of had it easy with the last few that really weren't that bad, and this one was just excruciating for me at times, and it just had this feeling in the pit of my stomach. And
Yeah, why was this worse than Necromantic? Who would have thought?
so much,
but it kind of was. And I mean, it is because it is that true story aspect of it. It is just like, oh God, like it happened. You're just still thinking about that. There's like that layer of it is, I mean, it's obvious to say, but it really is what just clinches so much of it and makes it so much more uncomfortable, because you're watching almost two movies. There's the one in your head too, like imagining like what it actually must have been like at the same time, and it's just horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you're basically spending 90 minutes of a movie watching various people make mistake after mistake after mistake, in like just over and over and over again, which is why to me it's unwatchable, or at least it's like difficult to watch, because it just gets your blood boiling. It got my blood boiling.
It's very much
And
a
I don't
yell
know,
at the screen movie.
Yes.
absolutely yell at the screen, like audibly and angrily. I'm curious what you thought about the ending of the movie, because I'd forgotten that this was how it ended, which is with, after everything has happened, the Ann Dad character is like giving what appears to be some sort of TV interview.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a moment of silence, I think, that she takes a beat after being asked a question that her like lawyer or whoever on the side says like, don't answer that, or you can't answer that, or whatever. And then she shifts and she like asks the TV interviewer, so like, where are you from? And then like, it was such an interesting moment, because it's clearly her sort of using a similar tactic that the Pat Healy character used earlier, this like tactic of trying to disarm someone and sort of change the narrative so that you can so you can stay in control. And I just loved that moment, because it really poses that question of like how much of her character was actually a victim of this manipulation, versus the actual like Becky, like how much sympathy and empathy should we have for this character, if any. And I'm curious what you all thought of that sort of like question that it seems to be asking at the end.
I'm happy you shared that reading too, because I did struggle with what exactly to make of that, of
I
deciding to
did
end
too,
on
but
that
I
moment.
like what you're saying.
And
Yeah.
I
Oh
think,
yeah.
yeah, and I
That's
think
just
that
what came to
is,
mind for me, at
Yeah.
least.
I think that's the best possible way to look at it. I
It
think
does
that
stick out for sure. Yeah.
the epilogue in general, I do feel like it drops the ball a bit with this movie. Because I think the main question here with this film is, all right, what we've painstakingly dramatized this horrible thing that happened. And so what is the larger purpose of this? Why is this, worth sitting through? And when you have a title like Compliance that suggests, a bigger theme of something that's going on here. And I do think that the epilogue doesn't quite follow through on that, because we kind of get a piecemeal thing where we get a little rush, kind of a rush through the investigation of how they end up finding the guy. We get a little scene of the girl considering a lawsuit, who this happened to. And then we end with this TV interview, which kind of just comes to a halt when she's being played the video and her lawyer says not to answer. And I'm not really sure that the director found the greater purpose in this movie. And if that would be my main criticism of it, is that it seems to maybe lose the thread a bit after that happens. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that's played differently for you, Seth.
I mean, I thought that it still just it follows through that all in such a sweeping sort of way, like moving really fast. It almost feels like it's all happening like in one day or something by the end of it. But what held it together for me, and I could agree that maybe it maybe lacks some like cohesion, because it is kind of difficult. Like it is a random, chaotic, evil act that occurred, and summing it all up into some sort of like lesson is or something is difficult. But I could agree that it could have been more. But I do think like what I follow through that whole montage is just everyone's face. I don't know, it's just like just following how like stuff is happening, investigations are occurring, like it's all flowing and everything, but like everybody still has like almost the same face that they had on when they found out that it was not a cop on the other end of the phone, kind of almost, which is I just at least found to be an interesting filmmaking technique for it to flow like that, because it is just like nothing is now. There's nothing that can be done after that to like fix anything. Like all this stuff that's going on and finding him and like the perpetrator guy on the phone, they go up to him and he has the exact same face that he always has on, and he's not really affected, because that's the feeling that there's no way for justice to occur in this sort of situation almost, or real catharsis to occur. It is just like an awful epiphany by the end that just goes through time. And yeah, I don't know, But I could agree a little bit. I'm curious. Yeah, Aisha, what did you think?
Um, I don't really know if it necessarily needed a greater purpose. I think for me, at least, the purpose seemed clear to me was to sort of lay out these rings of power and how, with all of them working together uh, cohesively, this is how something like this happens. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it really puts that in a very clear, concise way for me. And so, like, I guess that's kind of why I also read that final moment with Ann Dad's character as like this sort of kind of gauntlet throwing down of being like, okay, you may have felt empathy for this character, but maybe you shouldn't have as much as you might have at the end, because she too, like, kind of her like her instincts, her worst instincts got the best of her. And
Yeah,
I
and they come
think
from
that,
bad places. Yeah, they come from bad
right,
places. That kind of inherent belief that she has in like the powers that be, uh, it's all linked into like probably a bad side of her that like was there. You know.
right, like she made a choice just like her fiance made a choice. Even though he had to sort of be coerced into it, he still, there's plenty of people, and there were people in that fast food restaurant who did not make that same choice. And so I think that, to me, that's why the ending works. And I didn't necessarily need like another layer of, I mean, I definitely agree that it was a little bit rushed in terms of the aftermath, but I do think that final scene is kind of what seals it for me as like overall working and what it's trying to do.
Mhm. And one character that we never get to see more of, who I want to get everybody's thoughts on, is the fiance and where he factors into this machinery, that what's
Ugh.
going on here, because uh, he's the one person that you can't, besides the prank caller, that you can't fully excuse as just being dumb, because of what he ends up doing. And I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, it's like it gets to a point where he's making her do jumping jacks and spanking her, and then ends in the sexual assault, which he willingly participates in. And the
Mm-hmm.
actor who does this, I think, does a great job of kind of not letting us in on what's going through his mind. He seems so shell shocked through much of it, and that there's gears turning in his head that we don't fully get access to, which I think works here and is fitting, because I mean, what can you really say about somebody who would let that happen, and that person is out there and did do it, and it's kind of like a mystery, and the movie does kind of, it doesn't give us that moment where things turn into like a direct rape, basically, that we are just kind of let in on that, things just inched further that way, and this guy let it happen, and does end up leaving visibly upset, and even calls a friend to say, I did something wrong. But it's just interesting to me how little it gives us to work with there, to kind of let us fill in the gaps, which
Again, yeah, his face is all we have. He's just like aghast, like almost like he's watching himself do these things. And like, I mean, we are left to speculate as to whether or not, like, I mean, there probably is something in like deeper in him that has now been sort of let out of its cage in a certain way, since it is uh now allowed for him to do something that like in some like dark part of him maybe he would want to do. And like now that he has been given the okay, he's like doing it, but he's like disgusted, and everything like that is going on.
Yeah, it's very bleak. I don't know. Do I want to bring the Holocaust into this? I don't know, but it makes me
It's
it
been
makes
on,
me
it's like the easy one. I feel like it's been on my head, in my head too.
yeah, well, I just think about, those officers or those people who, claimed that they felt like they were under duress when they did horrible things. Or
Hmm.
this idea that, Hitler and the entire Third Reich and all of those were so just convincing that they made people do things that they wouldn't normally do. This is not something I believe. This is just, the overarching the excuses some people have given for why people did such horrible things. And I feel like there's some comparison to make on a very much smaller scale, but like it is this question of like individual responsibility versus, you know, authority, or like going with the flow, going with the consensus, or going with whoever the majority, even though they're not the majority, but whoever has the power in a way. And I think his character is kind of similar in a way that like he just needed permission to do something that he probably really wanted to do, or like was just going to do in some way, shape, or form. And he had permission. And even though he could recognize afterwards that he knew it was wrong, he still did it. Which to me is just so depressing and sad.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's why the Holocaust idea in this, and it is just like chain of command, all that stuff. It is, yeah, it's too simple to say that like, well, he told me to do it. It is like there is something in all of us, you know, like that we have a dark nature, and it could be unlocked in certain situations. Who are we to say that it wouldn't? We can never know unless put in these situations. Like God forbid, hope you would be strong and you wouldn't do these things and you would turn your back to it. But yeah, it's that is what's so bleak about it. And it is still empathetic in that way, that it does sort of display him as sort of like a normal person, and not as this like, he's not like this wild like anomaly, like ticking time bomb. You can tell from the second he walks in that guy is going to do something awful. It is just something buried in him that is possible, unfortunately.
And then, of course, you know, that brings us to the guy who is actually orchestrating all of this, and apparently gets off on doing it all over the place to different people. And, you know, for the first 40 minutes of the movie, he's completely unseen. It's just a voice on the other end of the phone, which I found to be very effective. But at that point, it does start showing his face, and we spend time with the guy walking around his house, you know, making lunch, kind of making faces at things.
It's such a great reveal. Yeah, that it is like so it's slow, but it is like sudden. Like suddenly you're seeing him, and it's very clear that this is not a police officer. Like, yeah.
And the one particularly disturbing detail is in the background of one shot. There's this big dad mug that's like, and we do eventually see like a daughter come in. But I did feel that it was more effective when we didn't see him. If I were to criticize something else about this movie, would maybe be that spending so much time with him almost simplified things to where we have such an overhead view of what's going on that the other characters don't, where up until that point it had been very claustrophobically focused on their situation. I think it would have been really cool to have gone all the way with that and
That's
never show his
interesting.
face.
I never thought about that. I mean, because yeah, it is interesting, and I don't know. I didn't do enough research to figure out if it was necessarily true or what they're even going on. That like, because yeah, my assumption it was like once I start like that this was more of like, I don't know, like much more horrible things I don't even want to say are like going on the other side of the phone. But instead, it is very much just a guy on the phone, and he's like making sandwiches. It's like, yeah, like you think he's like, I don't know, just like getting off to this in like a more like sexual way, which he like, but he is like just making sandwiches, and that's sort of like the shtick of it. And it is very strange and like creepy in a different sort of way. I don't know where they necessarily came up with that was what was going on, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do feel that that's a good point, Mark, that it would be perhaps more effective if we didn't see him until the very end. But I also think it's interesting that if I recall correctly, both in the movie and in real life, the guy was a telemarketer, which I think is kind of an
Sure.
apt profession to be doing this kind of horrible prank, because when you're a telemarketer, if you're a good telemarketer, you're gonna have you have tactics for how to keep people on the phone and keep them from hanging up on you. And so I think that little kind of reveal, the scene where he's picked up at the end of the movie, he is at his job, I believe, like is like trying to sell something. So I think that little detail is interesting, but it would have been, yeah, I could see it being way even more effective if we didn't know really anything about him until the end.
Because we
Because I
don't
think,
really know, right? Like that's the whole
well,
thing
yeah,
about it. We don't know what
yeah.
he was doing, why, or like what exactly. Yeah, like what was going on the other end of that phone call. Yeah, and like that is the most horrific thing to contemplate. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I give everyone a chance to give kind of final thoughts on this. Anything that didn't come up you wanted to say, and ultimately say if you would unwatch this, if you could, for whatever reason, you might do that for. So well, I'll go first, and then we'll go to Seth and let Aisha give us the final word on this topic. Um, I I think that we're all pretty much agreed on how effective this is in a very queasy, uncomfortable, tough to stomach way, and I think it deserves a lot of credit for keeping that level of realism and plausibility with a story that a lot of people would find frustrating for not being able to understand. And I do still struggle with the where it lands in the end in a way that I'm almost not sure that it quite justifies enough the horribleness of the experience for what it does with it afterwards. So I do feel that it loses a little bit of a grip at that point. But there's certainly the first, I don't know, it's probably like hour and 10 minutes or more of this movie, as far as it single-mindedly putting you through exactly what it would be like, that it does answer the question of how would this actually play out in real life. Like, I just can't believe it reading it. And that in the end, it does answer that question of, well, it would look like this. And maybe there's, you know, not that it depends, I guess, in the eye of the beholder, how much you take out of that, of whether it's there's more than just, hey, don't trust people on the phone, and this isn't how policing or managering is works necessarily. So don't do this. Be smart. And maybe I would have liked it a little more if it made some of those connections more itself instead of leaving that to us to speculate on. But again, some people might argue that's a strength of it. But you go ahead, Seth.
I mean, yeah, I do love how it is. If it's about anything, it's about like how these stringent systems that we set up are, if not like vigorously maintained and watched by individuals and like questioned constantly, they just breed like bad situations like this that just can, like, it becomes literal machinery. Like, it's called a machine, and it's for a reason, that it is just like, if A happens, B will continue to happen, and we will until somebody finally like shuts it off. And it is up to someone to do that, which is not a role in systems often, and it's not something that's encouraged in systems, which needs to be there in order for, yeah, I don't know, in order for it to be sustainable for human beings. So it's the, like, it, I know it like happened at a fast food restaurant, but even if this was fiction, it would be like the perfect place for it, because it is like a great little micro version of hierarchy and how it all works, and especially just the like sort of oppressive nature of it, in that you are working so hard for so little, and you should have more, and you don't have it, and you're sort of seen as lesser by your higher ups in like a bigger way, and in a more like absurd way, that you are like doing all this for the sake of like hamburgers and chicken and stuff like that, which is just, yeah, like, just only goes from there as far as bigger systems and bigger places are concerned. But
And it
yeah,
takes
I
the
don't know.
maintenance man to put a stop to it. He's the first person
I
who
love that,
finally
because
says, nope, not going to do
it
this.
can't take that long before you finally like get I don't know how many people in 10 go in the room, and like, I'd like to know that it would be less than 10 or something. But yeah, it's like, please, maintenance man, go in there and immediately at least just refuse loudly to make people second guess or something. Yeah. But I was also, again, just impressed by the filmmaking of it, because again, it would be very easy just to rely on a juicy story that's true and everything. I was impressed by it, the way it feels, and it has this sort of like gold sheen to things at certain points and all that B-roll. I was impressed by this movie. I think it is a lot more than just like living off the steam of a juicy story, for sure. Horrible story, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
It's bad tasting juice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have much to add. Do I wish I could unwatch it? No, but I don't know if I want to watch it ever again.
Absolutely.
I just feel like my blood pressure was very, very high for that
I don't know that I needed
90
this
minutes.
week. Yeah.
Yes. But I agree. I think it's a very strong movie. And like I said earlier, I think that it handles exploitation without actually exploiting itself. And I think, to me, that's what makes it work so well.
All right. Well, at least we're all agree we wish that the whole incident could just unhappen. But
Yeah.
if it had to, wouldn't unwatch the movie. So the next film we're going to talk about, which is 2007 Stuck, has a very different tone to it for a story that is also kind of horrifying to read about. And I'll just go ahead and dive right into what the real story is, which happened in 2001 in Fort Worth, Texas, where a 25-year-old nursing assistant struck 37-year-old Gregory Glenn Biggs with her car. And he was homeless at the time and ended up stuck halfway through her windshield. She was intoxicated on, I believe, marijuana, ecstasy, alcohol at the time. And she was afraid of getting in trouble. So she drove home, and in a stroke of luck, or bad luck for the man stuck in her windshield, nobody saw as she went into her garage and just went to bed and left him in there for anywhere from 1 to 2 days while he slowly bled to death. And he did survive the initial encounter, and it was pretty much agreed that he would have survived if it would have been reported. However, this person decided to wait for him to die, and allegedly came in and checked on him a couple different times, and eventually got her cousin and her cousin's friend to leave the body in a park. They burned part of the car to try and conceal evidence, and she became a suspect when she was heard laughing about the incident at a party like 4 months later. And eventually it did come to light. She is currently serving 50 years for murder, and the story itself has inspired a bunch of different adaptations. There apparently are episodes of CSI, Law and Order, and Fox's 911. And I guess the second season of Fargo, which I haven't seen, has something similar happen in it. So there's even a Bollywood remake of this movie, which honestly I thought about, like, why don't we just watch that instead? But
like musical numbers and everything.
Yeah, but this particular take was directed by Stuart Gordon of Reanimator and From Beyond. It makes these kind of splatterfest horror comedies generally, and this was actually his final film. So I don't know. I guess maybe I want to start with what you guys feel about what this movie is. Is it a dark comedy? Is it like a gross out horror movie? Or is there some sort of actual, convincing drama going on here that's getting to the root of this story?
I mean, this feels like it could have been like a Roger Corman movie from the 70s or 60s. It definitely feels to me like a movie that doesn't really take what happened seriously. At least that's how I felt. First of all, I was surprised after watching the film to learn that the woman in real life was a Black woman. And you've got Mina Savari here playing that character, and she has cornrows, and I guess it's just like, and her boyfriend is Black, Rashid, played by why am I blanking on his name? Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, God, I wish I knew it. I
Russell,
can't jump in
I
and
have
help
it.
here.
Yeah, I brought it. I have it. So you have like Mina Savari with cornrows, and then her boyfriend is played by Russell Hornsby. And so like that felt weird to me, a little
Yeah.
awkward. It's like, a classic example of Hollywood whitewashing a character.
Like
Um,
literally, yeah.
yeah, and then like there's a scene where her and Rashid are having sex while this guy is in her like in the garage, stuck in her windshield, and while they're having sex, and I guess while she's climaxing or maybe not, like all of a sudden she's reminded, like it's you see his face in the moment where she made impact with him at the car, and she's like starts screaming, and it's just like, what is this movie? um
Yeah.
it was tonally, it's just kind of all over the place. And even like the Rashid character is kind of played as a joke in a way, because like he claims that he's a gangster of some sort, but then like it's becomes very clear that like maybe he's not actually the gangster who he claims to be. And he's kind of a buffoon in a way, and
Yeah, he's a
making just
wacky
like,
guy kind of.
yeah, just the way Russell Hornsby plays him is like, it's kind of just this like himbo in a way, and it's very weird. So yeah, this movie, I found myself even more so than Compliance, like yelling out "what the fuck" many times, and putting my face in my palms and being like, "What is happening? This is bizarre and batshit." And yeah, so I'd say this is like it's it's a trash movie in the sense that like I think it knows it's trash. Like it's not, it's not trying to be high art by any means. Unlike
No,
Compliance, which I think was very much like a little bit more obviously realistic and going for more of an indie high art feel than what this is.
well, Compliance seems to feel like a responsibility to the people that were involved to do it as much justice as they can and do respect to these people that were involved and everything. Where yeah, this one, which I guess it is a little bit more like black and white a little bit, where it's like these are kind of bad choices. They are just like it's not really gray area. These are like bad choices that are escalating to more bad choices, knowingly so. I mean, there's a little bit you can of rope you can give them, a little bit of like, of course, yeah, like you've never been in that situation. Maybe you would do something crazy, but like again, ideally, like to think you wouldn't. But Roger Corman is pretty apt comparison that it is like read a little thing in the newspaper and like, wow, what a wild story. We got all these calls in about this wild story, so we better like, how are we gonna make this a romp and with laughs and sex and violence and make it very exciting and everything, because it does have a lot of comedy to it, which I do think. Oh, like were they? I don't know. I guess it is like it's not really that funny of a situation at all. Like I don't know. It's kind of reaching in that way. Like the beginning of the movie is interesting in that it feels, I mean, in parentheses, both of these movies, if you can go into them without having listened to this podcast, honestly, and Tony, if you could throw this at the beginning of the podcast, like you will have like a wild time, because I just didn't know anything about either of these movies watching them. And as much as I don't care about spoilers, like it was like a really intense experience for both of them, because I just was like, it's one kind of movie and then it's a whole other kind of movie. Well, especially with this one, and that like, yeah, because it's like feels like it was just going to be about a guy finding his way being a homeless man, and like because it was kind of, he like became friends with a guy in the park who was like teaching him the ropes and everything, and then all of a sudden gets hit by a car and the movie's like totally off on a whole other thing. It's wild.
Yeah, it wouldn't be on this podcast if the movie had continued in that vein. But it is interesting that the first act is, I think, more together than the rest of the movie is, because we are kind of introduced to two protagonists who at this point are sharing equal weight, where we have Mina Savari as this nurse who works at a nursing home, I believe, or maybe it's just a hospital. And then we, have Stephen Ree, who is he was from The Crying Game and V for Vendetta, an Irish actor who I generally like a lot. And
I told Marc that he was in V for Vendetta.
yes, exactly. I haven't seen that.
I'm really smart.
But I have seen The Crying Game. And, it's a kind of empathetic look at this
haven't.
guy who's, newly homeless or unhoused, perhaps just temporarily at this point, and the kind of bureaucracy that has to face that is not helping him out. There's kind of a pointed a moment where once he is stuck in the windshield, like he drives by the other guy that he met in the park who is being harassed by the cops and is trying to say, hey, look what's going on, and they don't care what he has to say, which is not subtle at all. But
it's like, there's a man attached to a car,
I know him. I recognize him. I don't know how he recognized him, but yeah,
exactly. He just saw his shoes.
That's that guy's shoes. But I do think it has, empathy for him, and I do want to give credit to Mina Savari, who I think makes her descent into just total self-interest credible. I think that the film, at its best, does take the care to kind of chart the path from her having this panic response while she is inhibited by drugs to she does stop at a hospital and then kind of chickens out, and she does almost call 911 at one point, and you can slowly see how it turns into a denial that just gets harder and harder to the point where she starts having resentment towards the guy stuck in her windshield, and this kind of victimhood that she is claiming and as a self-defense mechanism that culminates in, I think, the wildest moment in the movie, and my favorite is where she is like has this tantrum and just screams at him, "Why are you doing this to me?" While he is stuck bleeding in her
paralyzed.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you could certainly take that kind of, entitlement and purposeful victimhood is just ways that you can see that as a characteristic in people and in society in general. So I don't know, maybe because everything else kind of is trashy that I was surprised that that was still in the mix.
Yeah, I called it trashy, and I think it definitely is. But at the same time, there can also always be some sort of like layer of meaning or significance within any trash. And I think like that, as well as the fact that, like Compliance, this is it in its own trashy way. It's a meditation again on power and how that affects how we interact with one another. And in the very first scene of the movie, we see Mina Savari. She works in a nursing home, and we see how her boss is able to manipulate her into working on a weekend even though she's not supposed to, and this is her second weekend doing it. But she's like, well, you're up for a promotion, and if you don't want to, you don't have to come in tomorrow, but like then you're not going to be at the top, near the top of my list. And like, yeah, so like we see her character being exploited by her employer, very relatable, I think, for a lot of people. And then later on we see her neighbor, a little boy, hears. So I think like part is just so screwed up, but like he's honking the horn to try to get anyone to hear him that he's stuck in the garage. And so a kid comes by and he tells his mom. And as soon as he told his mom, I don't know why, I just kind of had a feeling this was going to be the twist, and I was correct, which is that like they're both Latino, and he goes, tells her his mom, and she goes and is like, oh, we have to go help him. And then the husband comes home and he's like, well, no, we can't because we might get deported. And I was like, oh, okay, of course that's the case. But at the same time,
what a thing to just throw in there.
It's such a thing to throw in there. I don't even know if it's true or not, because so much of this doesn't align with what actually happened, including the fact, spoiler, that like he lives at the end. He doesn't die. But like it is just the fact that sort of power, or like the fear of deportation, or the fear of not not being able to keep your job or whatever, all those things are what drive these choices that these characters make. And I think that's sort of, it's interesting to see that sort of play out in this movie that also just feels like it doesn't, like you were saying, Seth, it doesn't take as much care, I think, or it doesn't care as much about the real life people it's supposed to be depicting as Compliance does. So I guess in a way it might even make this movie more interesting. I'm not, but definitely not better than compliance.
Yeah, and that it is like a
Yeah.
fantasy. Like it's almost like granting him like this fictional version of how we wish it might have played out, and
It's
he gets
Inglorious
revenge and
Bastards
he
all over again.
gets exactly.
No, it was very Inglorious
It
Bastards.
was.
I didn't even think about that.
that. I think
Yeah.
we said it at the same time. That's fine.
Yeah.
He like she catches on fire and he gets to wreck her with the car and he stabs what's his face in the eye with a blue pen to death and stuff, and it's like he walks away from the burning building like he's an action hero almost, you know.
The little boy neighbor, like he looks up and the little boy's just waiting to grab his hand.
Yes.
It's like, oh
He
my
was still
goodness,
hanging
this
around
is-
waiting to see how this was going to turn out. But I think that there is a challenge in writing this movie of having to introduce complications, because once he's in that garage, you know, how do you fill the rest of the time in there? And the thing with the boy is part of that, and
the cell phone, her leaving the cell phone in
Yeah.
there.
Which was actually, I think, ended up being pretty clever, just in the fact that he does get through to the police, but he can't tell them where he is because he's just like, I'm in a garage. I have no idea where I am. And
No, it is really suspenseful moves
Yeah.
going on with those sequences where he is just alone in the garage and you're thinking about like, what the fuck would I do? Like, and him just trying to get water, trying to get the phone, you know. There are like, yeah, I called the movie trashy too, but I think it is keeps me really, really engaged for those sequences.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, more than anything else, what makes this qualify as unwatchable is just the gore of it. If like anyone who has a hard time with gore will have a hard time with this movie, because he's stuck in a windshield, and there are a lot of moments where I was literally cringing. At one, he's been impaled by the windshield wiper, and then, you know, once you realize that, then of course he has to sort of like take it out of it. It's just like, ugh, the whole time it's just like, oh, this is so painful to watch. Like, and anytime he moves, it's just like, so painful and so sad.
And he has these bones sticking out of his legs too, which in one of those sillier moments,
of course, a dog has to come in. Yeah.
Oh God! Again, that was like a moment where I was just like, and it's not just a dog; it's like a little Pomeranian or something, like a frou-frou dog whose name I think is like Princess. Yeah. So it's just like all these little details of like this little frou-frou dog goes and starts licking his wounds in the. It was, yeah.
That's really where I see Stuart Gordon, you know, like the guy who made Reanimator, behind this. Like, why did this particular guy choose this particular movie? And you can see that with, the little dog licking the leg bone. And maybe the less said about the dog's owner, the better, because that is one of the lamer jokes. He's like this kind of mincing, very 2007 gay guy, like, you know, calling after Princess. And I don't know. I think in general, the morbid humor here sometimes works. It keeps things interesting, and doesn't always. You know, there is some really gratuitous feeling things, like in the beginning when we were treated to this nice close-up of this elderly man covered in feces, and which is like, there's really no reason for this to be here. And this ridiculous moment where somebody is like clipping the toenails of someone and gets surprised. And
then she's bleeding,
and then shoots like blood out of the old lady's toe. Like, what is this doing in the same movie as everything else?
I mean, those moments aside, I will say that is like, both with Compliance and this movie, like one of the added unwatchable aspects of it is this sort of unlikely part of it, which is the setting or the backdrop of so much of what is going on has to do with this job, like this job that is like making her like warping you in a certain way. Like, she's doing all this so she doesn't get fired, and she's like constantly like trying to like go back and forth, like doing these insane things, like all the while like it all has to go off without a hitch, because like I can't lose my position. I might get a bigger position if I don't fuck this up, you know, if I can just get rid of this dude, you know, which is just, even it's as much as it's like silly in this case, it is just like, it's the part that is the most like, it's just so sad, because it is just so meaningless in the sight of a human dying in your garage, you know, and your humanity being lost because you're just so up your own ass about these things that don't matter.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the scene where she discovers that Rashid has been hooking up with someone else, and then like he catches
It's like
her with
full
this
Jerry
woman.
Springer.
It's full Jerry Springer. The woman is in bed completely naked, and then Mina Savari's character lunges after her. They start fighting, and then at one point she takes, I think, a cast iron skillet and hits her in the face, and somehow the woman's like not bleeding or anything. She's like still mobile and fine, and I was like,
She's
this
still
feels
just embarrassed.
yeah, it was very Looney Tunes-esque in a way that and this was after the guy is still in her windshield wiper. So this wasn't like an earlier scene before all that happened. This was like she's so upset about this woman that she's temporarily forgotten that she's got a guy literally in her windshield just dying slowly.
It's so jarring.
Like, what is happening?
Yeah, and I did find that funny because of when it happens, that she's going there panicking, trying to get help from this guy, and then just forgets about all of it in her rage when she finds this girl with him. And I like that about I don't know, Mina Savari's performance too, that she's definitely not afraid to just come off so awful in this, yet there's not necessarily one aha moment where she turns into a villain, that it's a very gradual thing, and I feel like I can see the same person in the early scenes as in the later scenes, without it going too far.
We thought she was like just this lovely, like good to all people nurse, at the beginning. They were right about her in American Beauty. Like she just peaked in high school, and this is the sequel to American Beauty. She just totally.
This is where she ended up.
Oh, it's sad.
Now, and on that note, I think that one of the kind of missed opportunities with this is with Stephen Ree's character, whatever his name is, that he really does share equal prominence with Mina Savari in the early scenes, and I guess just the nature of him being trapped in the car for the rest of it is that he's kind of reduced to, all right, all he has to do now is to just be a guy trying to escape constantly.
It's suddenly all physical acting after like the opposite in the prologue, basically.
But I still feel like there could have been some way to have this become more of a character arc for him or something, and just kind of like the 127 hours way, where you can be stuck in one situation for like almost a whole movie and find creative ways maybe to get into his headspace, or really fear the claustrophobia of it or something. I don't know exactly what I would have them do, but it does feel like it shifts decisively to focus on her as shortchanging him a little bit. And maybe that extends to the ending, which is definitely cathartic. In a movie like this, that's how you want to see everything end up, with him turning the tables. But it also doesn't really follow through on any of the other kind of thornier things that it brings up, especially the way it just kind of stops instead of really concludes at the end with him just looking back. I thought maybe it would be something where, we've had this thread of them not listening to, the other homeless guy who saw him and the way he's been mistreated. Like maybe he's going to be blamed for this, or have to, prove that he isn't somehow the victim here.
I think that once they Inglorious Bastarded, they were already like, we can't add anything else. We've already gone too far.
Yeah, I don't know what more they could have, like. The thing is that, like, at the end of the day, even though he lives, he's still unhoused. He's still like can't get a job, or he's having trouble getting a job, despite the fact that the movie makes it clear at the beginning that he was at one point successful career-wise. And I don't think that's not what the movie cares about. The movie just cares about he got hit, and then how is he going to escape, and how does what's her name, the Mina Savari character, kind of turn into Lady Macbeth and just like go completely insane for this horrible thing she did.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think this plays differently whether or not it's a true story? Because
Well, it
certain
tells you up
things.
front.
Oh, does it?
It tells
I
you.
forgot that.
Yeah, it if I remember correctly, it says in the opening credit like based on true events or something along those lines. So I think it tells you up front that that's the case. But I think if I didn't know if it was real, I don't know. I think I would have still. It's just so wacky that I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how I would if I would judge it differently. I still think it's kind of a very clumsy, weird movie that has some ideas, some deeper ideas that it's not like actually interested in exploring very deeply. Like it kind of like front loads the movie with ideas about people being exploited or people being forgotten by the government or by society. But then it's just like, okay, now this is full on survival picture slash.
You'll never believe what happens next.
Yeah, like what's gonna happen now that these two characters have collided in the worst way possible? It's like, yeah, what a weird movie. I'd never heard of this movie until you guys suggested it, and it's it is a doozy.
It is definitely an interesting contrast with Compliance in the very, very different ways, or just different approaches you could take to doing a true story, where this one doesn't matter that it's a true story or that anything about it. Unless you knew about the case, you wouldn't know that there is a wish fulfillment ending at the end. You wouldn't know that the ethnicity of the main character was changed, and that stuff only reflects poorly, I guess, the more you know about the real story on it. Whereas sure. I think Compliance very much gets a lot of its weight from it being a true thing, which is why it's so emphatic about it at the beginning, and it follows it so closely. But I do get it, and I'll just make this my final thoughts, and we can go back around in order like we did last time. This is shaky. There's especially the dialogue is a little rough sometimes, especially we talked about the Rashid character, and it gets a little too sitcom-y for me when there's he's trying to convince the girl's friend who comes over that everything's fine, and he's just sputtering, like doing the most unconvincing line, like yeah we were doing this actually, and she's oblivious to it, and I'm like, oh, come on. But
I just wish there was like the sneaky music in Twin Peaks playing during those sequences.
Yeah.
What do you think? What?
But I don't know. The main other credit of the guy who wrote this movie is the horror film Deathbed, and the killer bed. So maybe that's asking too much from this, but I do think with that as the starting point, it overachieves a little bit with having so much stuff in the mix that it's compelling for its own sake as a silly kind of gross out thriller that I did find funny at times, and that does have something in there for you to hold on to. So it's a fitting final film for Stuart Gordon that's not quite as silly as the crazy splatter movies that he made before this. And but yeah, definitely come to it for something that's very different from Compliance or any other movie like that, and it's kind of a ride, at least. But go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I think ride's a good way to put it. Absolutely. It is kind of feels like sideshow, like gossip column ridiculousness at a certain point in an old-fashioned way, like you said, Aisha, which is just like very much like there's a lot of older movies that are like that, where it's just like, well, that kind of happened, but we really ran with it. But it's an oddity for sure. It's just you have no idea where it's going, and I can at least say that is an oddity that you wouldn't expect from like also the caliber of filmmaking, which is not very high like minded, not a lot going on screen necessarily. Which I mean, in a way, like as much as I complain about it, like in a way almost serves it, because there's just it is only as good as the wildness of the story that's happening in front of you, I guess. And yeah, it is those cornrows, man. American Beauty girl. I don't know.
They're a lot. They're a lot to
Yeah.
take in.
Yeah. I don't know. Silly little movie. That's about all I can say.
Yeah, it's it definitely feels like a MTV Films era, like circa 2005, 2006 aesthetic. And there's also like a
Ooh.
lot of like aggressive hip hop as the soundtrack. That's just like a lot to take in against this backdrop of.
I could see teenagers like loving the shit out of this movie. Actually,
Yeah,
like at like a sleepover or something, being like, "This is crazy fucked up. This crazy fucked up movie."
Yeah, it has this like kind of 8 Mile kind of feel to it in a way. Including the location. Like I think it's supposed to be set in Rhode Island, but it could be, for all you know, it could be like the Midwest or like Detroit or something. I don't know. But I definitely think that this movie, a ride is the right way to put it. I think that it's. I don't know if I would recommend it per se, but I don't think it's like. I think it's interesting enough to like warrant a watch if you're not too like caught up on gore or concerned about gore, because it is a lot of stuff that I did not need or want to see.
Yeah, gross.
But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I agree that Mina Suvari is really really good in this role, and lends it this sort of like manic electricity that keeps the story going, even when it's like this. I can't believe people are doing this. Can't believe Princess is licking his his open bone wound.
Bad princess.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of unwatchable, and I don't know if I'll watch it again. But I can't say that I'm like angry that I watched it. So
yeah.
Would you watch it again before Compliance?
Oh, well,
I would say yes.
I watched it before I rewatched Compliance. So I guess that order. I don't know, because like I feel like maybe Compliance is maybe a good way, like a good starting point, and then this is like the chaser. I don't know.
But if you had to watch
fair.
one again now.
Oh, that's what you're asking. Sorry. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think I would watch Compliance again before I'd watch this.
Oh man. Well,
Yeah,
either
I
way,
don't
not
know.
an easy, not a fun night.
They're both about the same length, so like it's
Yeah.
you know that they're what I like about both of them is that they're kind of like they get in, they get out, like
Right.
it's short and sweet. Well, not
You
sweet,
can't look
but
away
short and
at all.
Short
Yeah.
and sour.
short and sour. Yes.
All right. Well, this was really fun. Thank you so much, Aisha, for joining us. The book is Wannabe, Reckonings with the Pop Culture That Shapes Me. Go out and get that now. You can also listen to Pop Culture Happy Hour, which is a great time as well. And do you have anything else out there you want to draw anyone's attention to or plug it at the time?
Yeah, if this is coming out when I think it is, I do have a couple events happening. I'm doing an event at the Strand on June 22nd, and that should be fun in New York City. So come out and say hi. I'll be talking about Wannabe and pop culture with Jordan Searles, who is just a really great film critic and a really great like internet presence. And I'm on Twitter, but also I'm like slowly migrating to Blue Sky.
We all might have to.
Yeah. So if you want to find me there, I'm at Aisha Harris. Yeah, Blue Sky is interesting. But for now, I'm still on Twitter because I do have a book to promote, and that's where everyone is. So check me out.
All right. Well, yeah, drive safely. And
Oh man, don't text and drive. I'll tell you what, I have thought about it every time I get in my car now. Like I'm putting that phone down.
yes.
And it's
I
not
mean,
even a flip phone with T9 or whatever. You know?
If there's ever a good PSA for not texting and driving, it's stuck. That's for sure.
I just heard Werner Herzog talking like during that whole sequence.
And if you've got to put that ecstasy tab on your tongue, do it once you're home. and safe, or you have a DD with you.
Yeah, or at least you've gotten rid of the bodies and you've already sorted that out. Then you can have fun.
Yeah.
And if the police call you, call them back first. Call 911 back.
Just hang up on them. You don't have to talk to them.
Yeah. Or maybe just stay out of McDonald's. Stick to the drive-thru. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.